But it has been testified that, and then we see Psalm 8, what is man that you're mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than angels. You've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. And so we're like, okay, that's what humans are supposed to be. That's what we're to experience. And yet, insightfully, the preacher of Hebrews says, now in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside of his control, okay? Therefore, everything in creation is supposed to be under the control of humanity. But at present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him. Right? What he's identifying is, if this is what we were made for, we're not experiencing that. We don't experience this vocation. There's a reason we take bear spray into Glacier National Park, because grizzlies don't know they're to be in subjection to us. But what he's identifying is, this may be our vocation. It's not what we're experiencing. And for his audience, those believers that were receiving this letter, they certainly didn't experience this kind of sense of authority and this vocation as humans of carrying out God's rule and reign, exercising dominion and his authority. They're not experiencing that sense of purpose, and they're not experiencing the fruit of that purpose. And he says, at present, we do not see everything in subjection to him, but, verse 9, what do we see? We see him, who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely, Jesus. That's who we see. We don't experience our vocation as humans, but what we do experience and what we do see clearly is we see him. Jesus, crowned with glory and honor. Okay, there's that language again. Right? Who, because he was made lower than the angels. Right? So some of this language that's coming out of Psalm 8 now is being attributed to Jesus. And I think that Psalm 8 clearly identifies humanity and our royal vocation, that we're called to be kings and queens of creation. That God has given us the authority to steward all that he has made. And yet, because of sin, because of Genesis chapter 3, when Adam, he abandons his post. He leaves the vocation that he was to represent for all of humanity, and instead subjects himself to sin and death and ultimately Satan. Abdicates his responsibility and his authority and gives it over. So then instead of kings and queens, humanity becomes servants and slaves. We're not exercising the authority that we're designed to. We're enslaved now to sin and the fear of death. And Satan reigns in the domain of darkness. And so we see a fractured experience. We have that experience, and what he says is it's not as it ought to be. However, the important thing to understand is that we see Jesus. So while humanity went into hiding, what's the first thing that Adam and Eve do when God re-enters the garden? They hide. They go into hiding. They've abdicated their authority, their vocation, their responsibility before God to reflect him and to carry out his rule and reign in creation, and instead they go hide. And humanity's been in hiding ever since. In the dark, unaware of what it means to be human, who we are, our responsibility, our authority, and our power given by God. And so humanity's in hiding, and what he identifies is what we do see is we see Jesus step out of the darkness and into the light, perfectly reflecting in the light of the glory of God. We see Jesus. And when we see Jesus, what we see is we see what humans are supposed to look like. In the first verses of Hebrews chapter 1, it's very clear that he is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. So there's no question that Jesus is God. But what we also see is that he is human. 100% God, 100% man. And in fact, he is more human than you or I are. Because he is, for the first time, the true human being. What humans were always meant to look like and to act like. In perfect, faithful obedience to the Father. Carrying out his will. And where do we see that obedience take him? Well, he's crowned with glory and honor there in verse 9. Because of the suffering of death. That's where his obedience took him. To death, in order, what? By grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. And so we see in Jesus Christ, not only God and what the Father is like, his character and his nature, but then we also see the human vocation that in humans we're to reflect God's nature and his character. The radiance of his glory, the imprint of his nature. And in Jesus Christ, that finally happens. So that humanity comes out of hiding and into the light and now demonstrates and shows who God is, which is what we were always called to do. Exercising his kingly authority, but also his servant and priestly responsibility to cultivate life. That wherever he goes and exercises God's authority, flourishing happens. Life happens. Plants grow, people live, demons are cast out, sickness is healed. This is the vocation of carrying out his rule and reign. And so what we see here is, for the first time, humanity has come out of hiding. And where Adam, as the first king of creation, and Eve, the queen of creation, where they subjected humanity to slavery, where the king and queen become servants and slaves, Jesus reestablishes the throne and the rule and reign of humanity on earth. And as we walk with him, when God says his goal for us in Romans is to shape us and conform us to the image of his Son, this is exactly what he's talking about. To restore us to our original role, our vocation as humans, to carry out his rule and reign, exercise dominion by grace and love and serving other people and establishing what is true, good, and beautiful on planet Earth. And so wherever we go, whatever your job is, whatever your daily activities take you, it's to establish and show the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the God of the universe. And setting things right that are wrong in your path, seeking justice, exercising mercy, but showing the love of Christ to everyone that you encounter. And so ultimately, what this passage, what he's demonstrating and what he's establishing is that Jesus Christ became like us so that we could become like him. So that we could become truly human once again. And so for those of us in this room who are in Christ, we experience that sanctification, that process by which he is slowly but surely, as we read his word and we walk in obedience, we become more and more like Christ. We start thinking his thoughts after him, and we start seeing things in the world that turn our stomach because they're gross, they're immoral, they're unnatural, they're contrary to God's way, and we go, oh, I don't like that. And every time we respond that way, that's Christ winning the day and transforming us into his image and showing us that's what it means to be human. But the world would try to convince you otherwise. The world would try to convince you that your humanity is something that you get to define. And that it's really up to everyone, and that this is just simply your opinion. But what we read here today is that this is communication direct from the one who made us. And he is restoring to us what it means to be human, so that as we walk in faithful obedience to the Son, redeemed by him, as we celebrated and we talked about and we sang about, and we're about to remember through the Lord's Supper, but that we have been given all of the resources we need in Christ, that we've been given guidance by his word, empowered by his Spirit, in order to walk according to his ways and show a watching world what it means to be human and what it means to live out our true vocation as human beings made in the image of God.